Hi, this is Daniela Berglas for GMREB TV. According to Stéphane Pagé, a lawyer specializing in real estate law for 13 years, home buyers and sellers expose themselves to many risks by not using the services of a real estate broker. Me Pagé is being contacted by a growing number of people who try to buy or sell a property by themselves and now find themselves in a difficult situation. GMREB TV met with Me Pagé to shed light on the risks of selling or buying a home without the help of a real estate broker.
Maître Pagé, thank you for coming from Quebec City to speak with us.
My pleasure.
Why are you interested in helping consumers and informing them of the risks of not doing business with a real estate broker?
As a lawyer, we're concerned with informing the public and advising the public. For most people, buying a home will be the largest investment of their life. And considering this, it's important to work with professionals.
In your 13 years of practice, you started off receiving about 1 call per month from people who did not use the services of a broker, and this resulted in problems. But the number of calls have now increased to 4 or 5 per week.
It started with a maximum of 1 call a month, but the number of people who are going through nightmarish situations has been steadily increasing.
So today, you'll expose some of the traps of not doing business with a real estate broker? What are some of the most common pitfalls for a seller?
The first problem a seller may encounter is having a buyer who agrees to purchase the property but with incomplete conditions, meaning financing conditions, inspection conditions. People try their best to do it properly, but they don't have the proper tools or knowledge and are essentially left to their own devices. There can also be problems with the inspection. If the home inspector does not have the proper qualifications, the seller may be faced with a buyer who wants to back out of the transaction, when in fact the problem doesn't really exist or was amplified. Another situation sellers may encounter is preparing the documents at the last minute, particularly the certificate of location. It does happen that at the last minute the parties are not able to reach an agreement or sign the deed of sale. As a result, the seller may find himself with 1 or 2 properties on his hands.
You mentioned financing conditions. Can you elaborate on this?
One of the situations I see is that people who don't use a broker do not have the required knowledge in some very specific and very important areas. And in my experience, financing is definitely one of these areas. What happens is that people who conclude a transaction by themselves ship the paperwork off to the notary. The notary verifies the documents a few days before the signing of the deed of sale and notices that no one has agreed to finance the property. He then asks the buyer for the source of their financing, and it's only then that the buyer realizes it might be a good idea to make a request for financing. And you have to remember that financing may be refused. So the house was put up for sale without a confirmed market value, and when the buyer goes to his financial institution, they may refuse to lend him the money. So obviously, a buyer who finds himself without financing also finds himself without a property, and the seller then finds himself without a buyer. So it's possible to end up in a terrible situation like this only a few hours before the signing at the notary's office.
Do you have a concrete example of a case that ended up in court of a seller who did not use the services of a real estate broker and ended up in a difficult situation?
There are many, but one that comes to mind is a case from 2009 in the Quebec City area. In the Mercier decision, Judge Catherine de la Rosa rendered a judgment in a case in which a seller put his property up for sale and the buyer backed out. Because the buyer did not purchase the property, the seller had to put it back on the market. He decided to sell it by himself without the help of a broker. It took some time before the seller was able to find a new buyer. Once he did find a new buyer and was able to sell the property after several months, he initiated legal action against the buyer who backed out in order to claim the losses he assumed in reselling the home, meaning the fees, interest, and damages. In its decision, the court determined that the recourse of the seller, who was the victim of damages, was flatly rejected. The court said that by choosing to resell the home without the services of a broker, the seller deprived himself of a large pool of potential clients and did not do business with a real estate professional. Because he acted without minimizing his damages by selling by himself, the court essentially said, tough luck for him. He did not take the necessary measures to minimize his damages. And it's not up to the buyer who backed out to compensate the seller, because the seller was in some respects at fault. These are the words of a court decision. It was a decision of the Superior Court which clearly states that a broker is a real estate professional. And by acting without the services of a broker, a seller is depriving himself of a large pool of clients.
Some people believe that selling without a broker means there are no costs involved. Is this true?
Absolutely not. Selling your property by yourself involves time, effort, and energy. So if you're interested in spending hours and hours showing your property to people who are more or less interested, that is your choice. There are also advertising fees to consider. You have to buy the signs, you have to buy ads, you have to place your ads in the media, you have to make people aware of your product. So there are fees involved, and there's also the possibility that problems will arise. There may be problems with the buyer that require legal action. These can involve seemingly endless legal fees and inconveniences. Lawyers' fees for a trial normally start at $15,000. But people certainly have a choice. They can choose to sell by themselves. But to think that it won't cost them anything is completely false.
Buyers can also be vulnerable. How can transactions turn bad for them?
One of the most common situations is the late issuance of the certificate of location. Often the seller hesitates for a long time. When not using the services of a broker, the seller will be faced with the obligation to produce the certificate of location at the last minute. And once the certificate of location is issued, it is often with an extensive delay. So we have a buyer who wants to move into the property, since he may not have anywhere else to live, and because there's a delay in issuing the certificate of location, or if it's issued with a problem, we find ourselves with a sale that's delayed. As a result, the buyer may not have a place to live. Buyers can also have major problems with the inspection. The pre-purchase inspection industry is not regulated. So if buyers want to purchase a home without the help of a broker and they want to have it inspected, they often pick up the yellow pages and search through all of the ads for the one they feel is best. But in most cases, they'll end up with an inspector who does not have third-party liability insurance. A buyer who has a home inspected by an inspector who does not have the necessary competencies, if the buyer ever discovers a hidden defect or other problem, their claim may be rejected, and the inspector won't be held responsible. If the inspector doesn't have insurance, the buyer can lose any chance of recourse.
What about cases of incorrect declarations?
It's a big problem because in many transactions without a broker, the standard real estate forms aren't being used, and there isn't a seller's declaration. What we often have is a verbal exchange. The buyer and seller are together in the home, and discussions take place about the problems that may affect the property or the existence of any major problems. So obviously this is considered verbal evidence. Is it admissible in court if the parties need to hire lawyers and go to trial? It is admissible, but it's a question of credibility. The seller will categorically affirm that he declared there was a problem with the property, and the buyer will also swear on the Bible that the seller never declared this problem to him. So this can result in a long, drawn-out court hearing, and the credibility of both parties will be heard, and it will be up to the judge to decide if the declarations were made or not. If the buyer ends up with a major problem to the house, he has to prove that he was not informed, that this problem was unknown to him. If he claims that the seller did not inform him of this problem, then it becomes an issue of credibility. If the court concludes that the seller did inform the buyer will obtain absolutely nothing. And that can be a major problem.
And to sum up, how do brokers make a difference and provide added value to a real estate transaction?
Real estate brokers have received important training that's mandatory. Brokers really are real estate professionals. There are 2 court decisions that have clearly stated this in recent years. Real estate brokers know the documents, the forms, the conditions, the clauses. They're able to identify the clauses that are important and the forms that are important. They also have the ability to accurately document what people want to say, what people must say, and what it means legally. When it comes to the drafting of clauses and the preparation of forms, the real estate broker is the professional. Brokers also take part in negotiations, which are not always easy. It may appear simple to put your house up for sale, but it involves more than simply heating up apple pie so that the home smells nice. There are important actions that must be taken, and there are often situations of multiple offers in which a seller puts their home up for sale and they may receive more than one offer to purchase in the same day or within a few hours of each other. Is a seller properly equipped to know in which order to respond to these offers, how to respond to them, who to respond to, and how to deal with these multiple offers? I don't think so, and the courts don't think so either, because they often see cases like this. Real estate brokers have the expertise to advise people, to tell them in what order the offers to purchase must be accepted, received, how to handle situations of multiple offers. This is very important.
Le courtier aussi a des obligations de prudence, de diligence et de renseignement. On parlait tout à l'heure du problème de l'inspection de bâtiments.
Real estate brokers also have the responsibility of due care and the duty to disclose. We spoke earlier of problems associated with building inspections and how the industry is not regulated. Anybody can inspect a property. However, according to real estate brokerage laws, brokers have the obligation of advising their clients to have the home inspected. They must also ensure that the inspector meets a minimum of requirements. These include holding errors and omissions liability insurance, issuing a written report, applying the standards of practice that are recognized by the OSCEQ, and using a written agreement that clearly states the rights and obligations of the client and the inspector. So to sum up, real estate brokers ensure that buyers are protected in the pre-purchase inspection, so that they're not dealing with a charlatan or someone who does not have insurance. Another added value provided by a broker in a real estate transaction is their role of intermediary. The broker is not emotionally involved in the transaction.
Quelqu'un qui est, je pourrais dire, un peu un intermédiaire. Alors, le courtier n'est pas émotivement impliqué dans une transaction. Alors, on évite des situations de querelles, de conflits et de propos verbaux. On m'a rapporté plusieurs situations où des...
This helps avoid arguments or situations of conflict. I've heard stories about buyers who visit the seller's home and say something like, the home is a pigsty, or it's not worth the asking price. Some sellers may get upset by having their property criticized, and the situation can degenerate into a verbal conflict. Obviously, a real estate broker wants to have the best price and the best qualified buyer, but they are an intermediary and are not emotionally involved in the transaction. And the last element is the fact that time is valuable for most people. If a person feels they can devote 50 or 60 hours to having people visit their property, that is their choice. But the real estate broker is someone who is available, interested in real estate, and will not get tired of showing the property. So if time is a consideration, using a real estate broker means you receive the services of a professional who is not only competent, but also available to ensure the entire transaction runs smoothly.
Thank you, Maître Pagé. And to finish the interview, would you mind sharing your slogan with us?
In my practice, I've noticed that no broker equals many problems.
Thank you, Maître Pagé.
My pleasure. In conclusion, a real estate broker is the professional who is best suited and equipped to help you avoid having to deal with situations like these. Real estate brokers are available anytime to answer your questions, regardless of whether they're financial or legal in nature. They can recommend the services of home inspectors, notaries, and many other professionals, as they have a vast network of contacts. A real estate broker will help save you time and will help ensure that your real estate transaction runs smoothly. For GMREB TV, this is Daniela Berglas, and I'll see you again soon.